for thought is the usual thing that people think about. Food for thought, that it's nourishment for the thought. My talk title today is Thought for Food. I don't know what I was thinking when I put that title together.
I'm hungry. Bring it on.
Yeah, you're hungry too, huh? Thought for food. Today we're going to entertain this idea about the thoughts that we entertain and how they feed us and what it is that we're fed through these thoughts that we continuously have. Today's reading and throughout the year, what we've been doing is we've been getting booked up. And this is my Science of Mind book. And what we've been doing is taking the entire book and reading it within a year. We have this great index that's outside. My book has the index in it. And the reading for today is just one paragraph. And interestingly enough, the paragraph that we're reading and talking about today is on obesity. Ernest Holmes had the nerve to talk about obesity. No, he had the insight to write a paragraph, an entire paragraph about his thoughts, beliefs, and understanding about this topic of obesity. Now, mind you, he wrote many, many years ago. And one of the things that really struck me about today's reading, it's really interesting. Once upon a time, just to kind of let y'all know and give you some insight as to me, once upon a time I wanted to have a pristine, just like really nice Science of Mind book because it's leather bound, Sonny got my name printed on it and stuff like that. But after a while and after reading some of this stuff and after really dissecting it, especially this year, what's happened for me is that I take my pen and I start circling and making arrows and putting notes on the side margins because for me, this book is kind of like to be studied, not just to keep, in a pristine condition. Because as I begin to absorb the information and as I begin to really be with it, I have these thoughts, these ideas, and I seek to really understand and maybe possibly, if it's at all possible, to get in the mind of Ernest Holmes and wonder what was he thinking and what was he feeling and what was his belief and his cosmology when he wrote this stuff. And looking at some of the words, and some of the words might be antiquated, the reading of this book is sometimes very turgid, and it's just like, wow, this is kind of thick here. What is he saying? And help me to break it down. And that's exactly why we're doing this, to kind of break it down and to really take it in bite-sized chunks so that we might assimilate it, that we might be with it in such a way, thought for food, food for thought, that we might be with it in such a way that we can really digest it or even let it marinate. Notice I'm using all the foodie words, right? That we can really use it and have it become part of who we are. Today, in today's reading, he says a normal-minded person will eat normally. If one is a glutton, it is because his mentality is filled with unexpressed longings, which he's trying to sublimate, which means to modify or divert. Food is a symbol of God's love, care, and substance, and should be eaten with thanksgiving. So here he's simply saying that food is a symbol of God's love. It reminds me of the 40 years going in the mountains and just kind of wandering off and having the food given daily through manna. Meaning in the Bible, there's a story of the folks going through for 40 years, and they didn't know where they were going to get their food from, but every day there was manna from heaven, or nourishment from heaven, if you will. And that was what sustained the people as they went through the desert and as they went through hard times and as they lived their life, kind of going from place to place until they found their permanent place to be. So when Ernest Holmes talks about food being a symbol for God's love, care, and substance and should be eaten with thanksgiving, what he's saying is that when we eat, when we take in nourishment, there's this automatic thanksgiving. There's this automatic gratitude that happens. The stomach gets fed, and we're satisfied. That feeling of satisfaction, that feeling of being full, is a feeling of thanksgiving. And I don't know if we've associated that before. However, he goes on to say right here, he says, but we dishonor God when we fear it. So food does not harm man, but we dishonor God when we fear it. There's a difference between feeding your hunger and your appetite. There's a difference between feeding your hunger and feeding your appetite. And so even though he's talking about obesity or gluttony or this overeating, if you will, we can always associate that with other things if eating is not something that we overdo. So over-relaxing. Is there a such thing? Some people call it laziness. Right? Overspending. Quickly going into anger. Quickly going into doubt and fear. If food is a representation of God's love for us and we have it available and we use it to nourish our bodies and we feel that feeling of thanksgiving, then there's nothing to fear. However, when we use this idea of food in other areas, whether it's relaxation, whether it's money, whether it's love interest, and we overdo it in those areas, what is that saying about who we are or about what we think? When folks overeat or overspend, there's this idea in the mind that there's not enough God, there's not enough care, or that God doesn't care enough about me, so I better get as much as I can, and I overdo it to the extent of gluttony or obesity, or where I fear food, or where I use food to satiate or to feel satisfied in a particular area of my life. And so it is in other areas of life when we do the same practice. So even though he's talking about food in this particular instance, we might be able to relate it to other areas of our life where we're overextending ourselves, where we're saying yes when we really mean no, I can't take on another project. I can't do it, but we're saying yes because there's a need to feel wanted, liked, appreciated, where we're not necessarily being true to ourselves, and we're overextending ourselves because somewhere within us there's this hole or this void or this fear that I am not enough. And that's what he's talking about. When we fear it, when we use it or anything else to satisfy or to fill a hole or a gap or a misconception or misperception that we may have about who we are. And it is simply because we have forgotten the truth. What's the truth? What's the truth? God and I are one. Right where you are, God is. There is enough. I don't have to hoard. I don't have to store up. I don't have to overdo, overspend. I don't have to be lazy. I don't have to be gluttonous. I don't have to do all this over stuff in order to be one with this power and this presence. It is already who I be. That's correct English. It is already who I am. But because there is some misperception, or we kind of get it a little bit twisted, we forget the truth of who we are, and we begin to try to fill that void with food, with sex, with money, with all kinds of stuff. You can name it. I mean, there's an anonymous program for almost every situation, right? And it's there because these are the avenues or the venues or the paths that we take on the outside of us in order to fill this gap or this hole or this sense of vacancy within us. And isn't it funny, not ha-ha funny, but interesting, that we seek something outside of us to fill something or the void that is inside. And the answers are never outside of us. The answers are never outside of us. I remember reading this kind of little story about God hanging out with its creation before, as humanity is around, and God hanging out with these quote-unquote angels, its creation, its spirit forms, and kind of saying, I want to hide myself somewhere, but kind of want to make it obvious, but I want to hide myself somewhere where, people won't be able to find me, like kind of playing hide and seek with its creation. And then one of the angels says, well, hide yourself within each and every one. They'll never look there. Because isn't it interesting that we go seeking? We go, I like listening to the Indigo Girls, and, it's just like we go to the psychologist, the psychiatrist, we go to the doctor of philosophy, we go to the mountaintop, we speak to the children, we chant, we go around, we walk on hot fire and coal, and we do all kinds of stuff to seek source. And in the meantime, source is right where we are. We don't look within. And it's kind of like, it's right where you are. It's right where you are. And because we are hardwired to commune and to be in that essence, because we're actually one with this power and this presence, there's this longing for the small self to connect with the big self, the large S self, the God, that higher power, that creative intelligence. And so we're hardwired to know ourselves, or to self-actualize, or to self-realize, and to come to know our life as the life of God, and yet we look outside of ourselves for this nirvana. We look outside ourselves for this enlightenment, when indeed it happens when we begin to look within. And when we begin to use our spiritual practices like prayer and meditation and affirmations and visioning and sacred service and tithing and sacred giving, being of a generous heart, when we use those sacred and those spiritual practices to know our life as life itself. I know that many times I have said, my life is the life of God. But as I have come to mature a little more and really be steeped in my own spiritual practice, I'm recognizing that my life is not the life of God. My life is God. And that little nuance in itself makes a huge difference. My life is God. My life is God. Your life is God. You are the perfect, unique, and magnificent way that God, that AKA life, that love, that joy, that radiance, that peace, abundance, and wisdom is out picturing on planet Earth. You are the life that is God. Your life is God. It is that life itself. And when we begin to use things like food, or we begin to use other substances instead of turning to substance itself, we miss the mark. And we begin to travel down a path that many have traveled before. And we begin to then wonder, why is this happening to me again? Or how can I get off of this treadmill or this hamster wheel? And the way off is to stop seeking outside of self, but to begin to turn within, to begin to recognize the truth of who we are. And that there's no thing outside of us that can fill us to the degree that we need to feel satiated, to feel full, so that we can be our best self. That doesn't happen with anything outside of us. That happens with our paying attention to this life energetic that is us. Thought for food. So when we begin to have these thoughts, the thought that my life is God, that love lives as me, that life is happening as me, that life is happening through me, that life is happening by me, that life is expressing magnificently as me, that thought is now food for our consciousness, and we begin now to feed and nourish and nurture ourselves and build ourselves up with that which is necessary to live fulfilling lives. I don't think any of you have come here on a Wednesday night when there's so many other things you could have been doing because you want to learn how to live a mediocre life. I believe that the reason we come together in spiritual community time after time, week after week, Sunday and Wednesday, Wednesday and Sunday, when we come for classes, when we come for special events, when we come and we sit or we be in spiritual community is because we are answering a call. We are answering a call to live as our greatness, not to settle for mediocrity, not to settle for the blah of life, but that we're answering this inner call no matter how soft the call may be or how loud the call may be. It is still a call that we're answering, that there's something that you have found right here in this spiritual community that continues to encourage you and to pull you out of mediocrity into your greatness. And that as we, as a spiritual community, come together and engage in spiritual practice and then leave here and engage in our own daily spiritual practice over and over again, as we begin to continuously have these thoughts and purposefully implant these thoughts in our mind, kind of having them around, affirmations, signs, having people call, having outgoing messages on our voicemail that remind people of their truth, that as we as spiritual community continue to remind each other and remind ourselves of this truth, that thought is our food. And that it begins to nurture us and nourish us in a way that brings about the enlightenment that we seek. That it is not outside of us. It's not in the next guru or the next workshop or the next whatever, but that it is right where we are. Put it inside of each of them. They'll never look there. They'll never look there. And that's exactly where we get to look. That's exactly where we get to be. He says, in the rest of that paragraph, he says, it is just as disastrous to abuse God's gift by becoming gluttonous as it is to dishonor the spiritual man by fearing food. So we don't want to fear it, but we don't want to overindulge. We just want to have a regular relationship with all things. That's what Ernest Holmes talked about. He says, I believe that we're all revealers of truth. Not only did he say that, but he says, I believe that we can all achieve freedom from all discord. And this is what he's talking about here. So if it's physical food that's a problem, or drinking, or gambling, or shopping, or you name it, gossiping. I think they have a Gossips Anonymous too, for folks who just, girl, did you hear what she said last week? I mean, sometimes we're just addicted to the drama. Sometimes folks are just, they're just in it. And the goal is freedom from all discord. That we don't overindulge in it and that we don't fear it. So he says to mentally free yourself from the weight, declare that you are an offspring of God. So now he's getting into the solution. So if you find that you've been overindulging or staying away from food, is that wheat, sugar, gluten-free? I'm lactose intolerant, No. If we find ourselves overdoing it, people want to eat correctly all the time. I want to be at my best, right? I want to be at my best, and I want to eat foods that agree with me, and I don't really necessarily have a preference, and how you do your food is great. Because sometimes I like the pastas and the cheeses and all that rich stuff, and then other times it's kind of like, oh no, I'm juicing today. Only fruits and vegetable, organic. So it doesn't matter, right? But when I am fearing it, like, oh no, I can't have that, or when I am overindulging, there's a little bit of this like, whoa. How to break free from that. To mentally free yourselves from the weight, from the burden of fearing or overindulging, from staying away, and it's just a pendulum swing, right? One extreme to the next, one extreme to the next. So to free yourself, this is the third time I said that, right? To free yourself from the weight, declare that you are an offspring of God, that you are spirit, that both your appetite and the assimilation of your food are functioning in divine order, and that your body is manifesting symmetry and perfection. He said, declare this. Recognize this. Know this. And again, even though he's talking about physical food, when we look at food as just a placeholder for whatever we are overindulging in or fearing, declare that you are spirit. Declare it. My life is God. Therefore, that which is true of God is true about me. So the perfection that God is, I am. The wholeness that God is, I am. The balance, the joy, the clarity, the radiance, the wisdom, the divine intelligence and creativity and beauty that God is, I am. And when we declare that, and when we declare it over and over again and recognize that that is the truth, then we begin to let go of the shackles of living in the extremes. And we begin to live in balance in the center, which is where life fully expresses. Life doesn't fully express in the extremes of overindulgence or fear of. Folks are living fully when they're living in balance, when they're not afraid of things or when they're not overindulging in things, but when there is this balance so that we can appreciate all of life's good and wonder. So it just kind of goes back to what we tell ourselves. Thought for food. Is my thought that God is out there and I'm here? Or is my thought that my life is spirit, that my life is the perfect and divine way that God is showing up on this planet? And as I continuously feed myself those thoughts for food, as I continuously feed my mind, my body, my psyche, my spirit, my soul, as I continuously feed myself those thoughts, because we know where those thoughts come from, we begin to kind of move out those thoughts of unworthiness, doubt, fear, separation. Because it is when we believe more in separation than we believe in our oneness with this power and presence that we have the discord. And we can only experience freedom from all discord when we recognize that our life is God. That there's nothing, no thing that can separate our life from the life of God. From the life of love, of abundance, of joy, of peace, of harmony, of divine creativity. There's nothing that can separate us from that. That is who we are. That is who we are. So we're going to go into our quiet time now. Our time in the silence, where we actually get an opportunity to have thought for food and food for thought.